your mind around this one. They're going to a hurricane-prone area, and they think that's better than Colorado because it likely is when it comes to reliable power. I just think about that. We're going to go into Hurricane Alley because we feel better about our power supply there than we do in Colorado.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy here in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. For this week's show, we have a little bit of a kind of a potpourri episode, a bunch of different topics that we wanted to touch on that were, coming across our desks. We thought we wanted to update you on. Just real briefly to start, let folks know one of the bills that we've talked about on a previous PowerGab episode is being heard in the House Energy and Environment Committee, today. It's the Gas Utility Service Bill, House Bill 26-1129. This is the one that was proposed that would exempt residential ratepayers essentially from the state's clean heat plan regulations as a way to try to, protect them from having their natural gas furnaces eventually be phased out, or protect them from having to subsidize other people who choose to make that switch. So that's coming up for its first committee hearing today. Sarah Montalbano, who we've had here on the show and is also a policy analyst that works with you, Amy, at Always On Energy Research, as well as with us at II. She's actually going to be testifying on that bill today. And when she does, we'll be sure to put that on the website. Maybe we'll drop it in the show notes as well once that link goes live, just so folks get an idea of what we're saying about this legislation.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I'm hoping to tune into the testimony today because I want to hear what people say who oppose it, who oppose not allowing residential ratepayers in Colorado the opportunity to use natural gas. I really want to hear the argument why, because if they don't, or let's say this bill doesn't pass, actually, let's just assume it's not.
Right.
Let's be honest, it's not going to pass. But Colorado is eliminating its redundancy in fuel supply and delivering of power because it's going to, and by the way, it's eliminating the most reliable source of power, which is the natural gas underground pipelines delivered to residential homes. Think of the last time your natural gas went out. Actually, I can't. No, I can't. I don't remember. Actually, I'll tell you what. It was our fault. It was a landscaper's fault because he pulled the meter off my house. But I was the one shut off, and they shut off two homes. Obviously in my house, but natural gas delivered to residential neighborhoods, delivered to homes, to residential ratepayers, rarely goes off. It just doesn't. The reliability rate there is astounding. I think I read a statistic, Jake, that said it might have an outage once every 10 years. Now, we're going to get rid of that really reliable source, and we're going to put it into overhead power lines that are susceptible to, wind events, which we see, susceptible to any kind of weather event. And that's not to knock the grid, but it's just the reality of it. Right. And so the most insulting part of this is not only, utilities are going to get to recoup their stranded assets because that's the deal. We pay for those. So if you're a natural gas customer, you're going to pay for utility stranded assets, but no one's paying for your stranded assets, for my stranded assets, like my furnace, my two hot water heaters, whatever, my natural gas fireplaces. Nobody's paying for that but me. So we pay for the utility stranded assets. We pay for our own stranded assets. Oh, and then it gets worse because then we have to pay to build out the grid that will be needed to power the appliances that we're dumping And because it's electric, they have to build additional load and they have to build the transmission and the distribution. Well, they're going to have to upgrade it because we're going to be pulling so much more power. And we're going to have to pay for all of that too. I mean, and we've written about this. So this is, and we've talked about it on the show. But I'm curious to know what people are going to say that oppose the exemption for residential ratepayers, what their argument is, and if it's health benefits, I'm going to say that dog doesn't hunt. You know what? It is the existential threat to power is no power. The existential threat to human health is no power, period. I don't want to hear about asthma or anything else. No power is absolutely positively the worst. And no power in winter is the worst of all. So I'll be curious to see what their arguments are.
Yeah, I have a feeling, like you mentioned, I have a feeling the public health, the fad that we've seen over the last few years where suddenly it's asthma and respiratory issues is why we're pushing for electrification, even though for years prior that never came up and there was a totally different pretext. So I have a feeling that'll come up. Of course, the climate issue will come up. But what I'm most interested in is just the general tenor of the debate, because I think for the first time what this bill does, and to your point, we're not holding our breath, waiting for this thing to pass. It's probably almost certainly going to get voted down in this committee. But what I do appreciate about it is it, for the first time, puts this issue in the forefront in the political arena, right? Because as we've talked about before, this was kicked off by a legislative bill back in 2021, but that was far more modest in what it was proposing. It was only like a 20% emissions reduction. It didn't say anything about forced electrification. And that gradually snowballed over the last few years at the PUC in these rulemaking proceedings that nerds like you and I follow, but the average Coloradan isn't aware of that. And these aren't people that they vote for, and they're not sitting there like we are waiting every Wednesday to watch a PUC commissioner meeting. So this is all happening behind the scenes. And so at the very least, what this does is put this into the people's body to have their elected representatives have an open debate about this issue. Do we actually want people to have their natural gas systems ripped out of their homes? And if so, say it loud and proud and make yourself accountable to the voters. So that to me is what's going to be most interesting about this. Like we said, it's almost certainly going to get voted down on party lines. I can predict it now. Call me Nostradamus. I think that's what's going to happen. But still, I think it's very valuable that this is becoming a public discussion, because for the longest, last 5 years or so, it really has not been a wide public discussion about whether this is the course that we want the state to take. Because
when we go to cocktail parties or garden parties, we ask people if they've ever heard of the clean heat plan.
That's right.
When my HVAC guy has never heard of it, or when the guy comes to fix my fireplace, my natural gas fireplace has never heard of it, I'm like, oh my gosh, we have a problem. They don't even know that their business is ending.
That's right. Well, one thing you mentioned, though, about this bill and the benefits of the gas system is redundancy and resiliency in the system. And we got sort of a crystal clear example of why that can be so important, not for just obvious reasons, but for economic reasons and to be economically competitive in the state of Colorado. The big news this week and the business front is that Palantir, which was Colorado's largest publicly traded company, I think at one point I saw a statistic that at the peak of its market valuation last year, it was worth more than every other company in the state of Colorado combined. So this is a behemoth of a company that was headquartered right here in Colorado. So something for the community to have pride in, politicians to have pride in, to tout that we were attracting all these wonderful companies. Well, they all of a sudden announced that they're pulling up stakes and they're heading for Florida and relocating their headquarters there. And they didn't at first say why, but some enterprising people did some digging into an SEC 10K that they actually just filed this week as well, and offered some clues as to why they might be leaving the state of Colorado.
Yeah, this is a big deal. So this is it's Palantir, and some 500 jobs. We don't know what the status of those jobs are yet, but Palantir leaving and the way they've left is enormous. Now, I remember flashback to last summer, I think it was, where the downtown Denver developer said that his number one problem besides financing, because finance always an issue, but besides financing is reliable power. in downtown Denver. Like, yeah, I'm not, what? It's not as if we're downtown, Aleppo or Mogadishu. You're talking about downtown Denver, which fancies itself the Silicon Valley of the Rocky Mountains. Well, let's put it this way: Silicon Valley is shutting its doors, in at least in Denver, and they cited two reasons. One was last year's AI reporting bill, which, okay, they don't want to leave. The other one, though, was climate risk issues. And they mentioned specifically wildfires and public safety power shutoffs. Now, are they not doing their fair share? Well, here's the thing. If you have to have power, public safety power shutoffs don't work for you. And if they have to have a generator, as well as be in a state that is openly hostile to them, then why would you stay? And they left. And what I laughed about is the governor said they didn't tell him. Well, they're not required to tell you. They don't have to tell you. They're just leaving. And by the way, did you talk with, and maybe you did, but I want to say, did you talk with them about the horrible energy policy that continues in this state? Did you ask them their opinion? My guess is you didn't care. So they've picked it. They're shutting their headquarters and they're going to Miami, which, by the way, a number of companies are now in Miami. So these large Silicon Valley companies that said, we're leaving, we're going to go to some other state or whatever, they are now in Miami. So Palantir left California, came to Colorado, and whoops, this is not that much different than where we left. So going down to Miami, where they are assured a better regulatory environment, but also think about this. Wrap your mind around this one. They're going to a hurricane-prone area, and they think that's better than Colorado because it likely is when it comes to reliable power. I just think about that. We're going to go into Hurricane Alley because we feel better about our power supply there than we do in Colorado.
That's a great point, because I've seen some people glom onto that climate risk language and try to put a gloss on it to say, oh, they're just worried about the effects of climate change in Colorado. It's not the policy, it's the effects of climate change, which the retort to that is what you just pointed out. They're going to Florida, which all the most extreme climate projections tell us is going to be potentially underwater if things go bad, if hurricanes will get more extreme and more advanced. So the fact that they chose to go to Florida tells me that's not what they're getting at. It is citing the outages and the wildfire policy and all the rest, because Palantir is a tech company. They need electricity to operate, and they cite the fact that a lot of their workforce in Colorado is remote. And so if there's public safety power shutoffs, they can't get their employees to log in to actively contribute to the company. So even if headquarters is up, their employees can't work. And so that's just untenable for a company. It's untenable for any company, frankly, but especially for a tech company. And when you're trying to be attractive, like you said, trying to fancy yourself as the Silicon Valley of the Rocky Mountains, you better at least have some power to make sure that those people can operate in your region.
Right. And the idea that somehow, I think it's actually more than just the public safety power shutoffs too. It's also, they're forward thinking and they're not stupid. They've probably run models as well. And they're looking at what the cost input is going to be of their power. And it's only going to get more expensive for them. So go to a state where you have a stable power supply, even in the middle of Hurricane Alley. I'll take that. So you'll go to a state or that's also supposed to be underwater, where the power supply is more reliable and stable, and so will the cost be. Colorado's cost projections for the future, based on the policy trajectory, will be more like Germany or the UK, with rates well over, well, knocking on the door of 40 cents a kilowatt hour. And I suspect we could easily overtake California as event, in the coming, let's say 5 to 10 years, we could overtake them and have higher rates than California. And I'm sure they've done the math on that and said, you know what, we're out.
That's right. And it's not just us that have said that and found that in our own modeling, but if you remember PUC Chair Eric Blank, I think we covered one of the meetings where he even speculated that, oh, if this worst comes to worst, we're looking at surpassing PG&E on this current trajectory that we're at. So it's even the PUC is sort of wise to this. And one quick thing before we move to our last topic that also I want to touch on that you mentioned is how quickly this all changed. Because if folks will recall when we got Palantir, when Colorado got Palantir headquartered here, when they pulled out of Silicon Valley, one of the things that their CEO talked about was that, well, Colorado is just a much more pragmatic political and policy climate than California, which, people that are in the weeds like us maybe at the time could have quarreled with a little bit, but you can understand where he was coming from, right? It was not super well into one party rule, and we hadn't gone so far down the rabbit hole with this stuff, but just little over 5 years later, look how much things have changed. It's not so much political pragmatism and, it's such a welcoming place. It's in the middle of the week without forward notice, we're pulling up stakes and we're getting the heck out of here and we're heading east and we're going somewhere that can power us and is a much more friendly climate. So how quickly these things have changed and how quickly the predictions we've made about what this could mean are coming true.
Right. So, and to that point, I want to actually go back to the 90s when Colorado was labeled the hate state because of what was that Amendment 2. And the left, that's when the left started plotting taking over. Okay. They did clearly. So fast forward now 30 plus years and Colorado has become the very thing that the left said it would never, which is it's a hate state. It absolutely hates industries and companies that don't 100% align with them ideologically. So they'll stand outside and protest and don't like what Palantir is doing. And you saw people globbing on social media. Good riddance. We're so glad you're gone.
Right.
Get out. We didn't like you anyway. Colorado is not beautiful the way it likes to think it is. It is a state that is so ideologically entrenched on one side that it cannot tolerate anything that diverges from its progressive perspective of itself. And they think it's beautiful. It's not. I get outside of Colorado and you'll realize that we have a bad reputation. So my guess is Palantir didn't do well. You're right. Maybe in 2020 it was a little better. We could see the writing on the wall, but they could. So literally in 5.5, 6 years, they're gone. It didn't take them long. They left. Right. Capital can flee, by the way. Capital can move.
That's a great lesson that in 2026, it's never been easier for capital to move somewhere else to greener pastures. But yeah, I think it's quite clear that at least amongst many big businesses, Colorado has lost a little bit of its luster. But one Coloradan that isn't, I think, entrenched in that, the ideological capture that you mentioned and sort of the being unfriendly to business is the current Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, who is making a little bit of headlines this week because he just gave sort of a barn burner of a speech before the IEA, International Energy Agency, kind of chastising them for their, I don't want to use the word we always use, but their myopia on net zero. I mean, this is a potentially valuable international body that can provide statistics and data and projections and all these things at support. And yet it's been so laser focused on net zero. And Chris Wright gave, like I said, a barn burner of a speech telling them that you really ought to be reconsidering your focus. And if you don't reconsider your focus, the U.S. is going to reconsider its participation in the IEA.
Yeah, this is a really big deal. And I get it that it's people like us that read this stuff. But first of all, I want to say this. The best thing to happen to reliable, affordable power is Chris Wright. He has been absolutely amazing. And he's been an amazing ambassador for energy and the importance of it. And he talks about human thriving. And that's what he talked about at this IEA, confab that they had. And I think it was the last day speaker. And he just said, more energy is better. Talked about human thriving, bettering human lives, which is Liberty Energy's, a project of Liberty Energy. He talked about people that don't have power or don't even have any kind of access to get, natural gas or propane to cook in their homes. And those are the people who are really having asthma and respiratory problems because they're burning dung and wood in their homes. And that's true environmental pollution stuck inside of your home. He talked about all of these things in this great speech, and he was chastising net zero, which I think came out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which the United States has already pulled out of. He talked about the just sort of the insidiousness of net zero, and it's anti-human. You can't better human lives on net zero, and he wants to solve poverty and energy poverty issues in particular. And then during the speech, he says, and by the way, there have been there have been some small changes at the IEA, and the president of the IEA is sitting there. So this is what I think is so funny. And then he said, but if they don't make more changes and don't get off of this drumbeat for net zero, the United States will pull out. You have 1 year. And it was like, okay, good for you. You know what? We don't have to support an international agency that says net zero, constantly is trying to be the champion of net zero. Just remember what net zero is. Net zero, it is through the myopic lens of emissions only from point of generation. And that tends to mean wind and solar. You think they're embracing nuclear a little bit, but they're not embracing it a lot. But it's all about wind and solar. But what it really is about is a starvation diet. It's an energy starvation diet. And that is the worst thing for human thriving. So Chris Wright doing this, saying it out loud, and he did it in his own way, which is sort of as this happy warrior. Oh, yeah, by the way, we're not going to support this. And he's saying this on an international stage about the United States at the same time that the state of Colorado is taking the state over a cliff on the quest for net zero. You couldn't find a more stark contrast between what Chris Wright is doing right now on an international stage versus what is happening right now as we are talking down at the state capitol. It is really, I mean, to me, I think about that. We have one of the most important energy leaders in the world right now is Chris Wright from our own home state of Colorado, lives in Denver, has a Colorado-based company. And the state of Colorado is going in the total opposite direction as he is leading the United States under the Trump administration and ultimately leading the world. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, it really was a full display of sort of a tale of two different Colorado visions, right? You had, like you said, the Coloradan on the international stage portraying this optimistic, I like the happy warrior. I think that is a fitting image for Chris Wright, because that's everything he does is about what energy can do for humanity and improve people's lives. And it's a very optimistic picture compared to doom and gloom here in Colorado. The world's going to end unless we shutter fossil fuels and we rapidly build out a particular kind of resource. And it's just a very different picture that's being painted. And it was worth us, I think, drawing some attention to.
I want to, one more thing he did that I think was really cool. He just flew a nuclear reactor from California to Utah in a C-17.
That's right.
I mean, you know what? Talk about portable. He just flew a nuclear reactor in a C-17. That's amazing. And his point was, and it's going to go on to a military installation. They said it can power. And by the way, I would say this nameplate capacity on nuclear, pretty close to accredited capacity. It's not like wind and solar where you say, I've got a 100 megawatt facility that's a solar facility, and your accredited capacity might be 13% of that. So it'd be 13 megawatts as opposed to 100 megawatts. You fly a nuclear reactor from one state to another, drop it onto a base that can be used in a military installation or a forward military installation of some kind, or you need it in an emergency. If it says it's going to power 5,000 homes, you can bet that it's probably can power, 4,950. That's and he just transported it. He was the military did, but in a C-17. I'm such a fan of Chris Wright. I mean, I've known him personally, but to watch him in this way is a different level.
Yeah, and it's a cool gaze into the future, a world where we can deploy via aircraft nuclear reactors on command. I have to say that as an energy nerd, that is pretty cool, no doubt. As we're coming up on time here, Amy, do you have any takeaways for our listeners on any of these topics?
Yeah, I number one, as I think Palantir and the U-Haul pulling up and them bugging out is a sign of things to come. I think we're going to see more and more of that as more companies look and say, listen, capital can move, and we're seeing it. And the idea that nobody knew it was happening, everybody knew it was coming. We didn't know who would be first or the loudest but I would say expect more of that, not less. I would expect, in fact, as we get closer and closer to these like 2030 and 2035 deadlines, arbitrary deadlines that the legislature has set on emissions reductions, I would say we're going to see a lot more of that because they need reliable power. That's number one. Number two, we should all be proud that Chris Wright is a Coloradan because he's been one of the most amazing champions of reliable, affordable power, just internationally. And this is one of the things that, if you ever ask what keeps you up at night, people not being able to pay their power bills. That's one of the keeps me up. And the idea that, solve it by making middle-class voters pay more. No, you solve it by actually making energy affordable. And we're doing the opposite. So, I just be proud of Chris Wright. He's an amazing guy. And then last, as we've said, I say every time, firm your own grid. You've got to get battery backup, even if it's a small one, to keep your keep your phone powered, keep your laptop powered. It's not going to heat your home, but you've got to have some kind of backup power because the state isn't going to do it for you. In fact, they're doing just the opposite, which brings us to our generator. We're generator giveaway for listeners. Drop comments in each one of the show notes that began at the first of the year. We're going to take it to the end of the legislative session. We're pulling cool quotes. And then we'll give them, we'll let you guys know if, we'll tell you about some of them, we'll read some of them on the air, and then we'll pick a few, and then we'll let you vote on which one is your favorite. Be clever, be pithy, be serious, be whatever, but make your comment stand out.
Yep, and you'll get a chance to take this bad boy home and do what Amy always says and firm your own grid. So folks, make sure you start sending those comments in. But that does it for us on another episode here of PowerGab. If folks like what they saw, they can head over to powergab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcast. And if you'd like to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or guests you'd like to see us interview on the program, you can send those our way at info@powergab.org. We always love hearing from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.